folks, it's Jake here, and this is Bandit. Welcome back to Canadian Cutting Edge. Yeah, Bandit's going to kiss me on cue. Today we're taking a look at this knife. This is the AKRI by Miguron, actually the AKRI 2. All that they've changed is the steel. The original version of the AKRI came with DC53, which is, if you like carbon steel, an excellent carbon steel. Better than D2. But Sandvik 14C28N, on this version, you can either get this stonewash with this sort of tan sand color G10, or you can get it in black G10 with a black PVD coated 14C28N stainless steel blade. This is a full-sized folder liner lock. So, what do you think? Let's get to the tabletop. Let's begin this show with a size comparison. We've got the Ontario Rat 1, which I often use for size comparison. Line up those pivot pins, and we find that these knives are very much the same size. It's maybe slightly shorter in the handle, but very much the same. So let's move on here. What do we got? Like I said, Sandvik 14C28N steel for this thing. Not bad. Some of you guys are going to be wondering what the price is. Yeah, let's get that over with. I got mine from White Mountain Knives. It's $47.96 there. You save 10% with coupon code CCE, and that makes it $43.16 American. That's not bad. It's about $58 Canadian. Now, there is no Canadian store that has this, at least none that I found, and Hero Outdoors doesn't count. They're a drop shipper, ships everything in from outside of Canada. You can also get this, I found, on Miguron's website, miguronknives.com. They're selling it for just under 50 US shekels, so a little bit more money. And like I said, it just comes those two different ways. We've got a nice stonewash finish on this blade. I really like that. I prefer that over a PVD coating. We've got a rounded spine. Full thickness goes a little bit over halfway along, and then it slowly starts tapering down to the tip. It's got a fairly strong tip back here. When I did my tip testing, yeah, no damage there at all. We've got a long, shallow belly and then a short, straight section here. We've got a flat grind, like a saber grind, doesn't come to the spine. Good big flat area here to clamp onto if you've got a guided sharpening system. It's a little bit thick. Like, this is a tough blade. I'll give you the exact dimensions of everything a little bit later. Some jimping just right here at the end. I wish they would have made that come out further, but that's pretty much okay. And that's the stop pin right there. Opens up onto that stop pin. Sharpener's choil, nice and big. I like this sharpener's choil a lot. It goes past the end of the plunge, so it's easy to sharpen this knife right to the end without getting into the plunge and messing it up. We've got the steel type put on the blade right there, 14C28N, nice and small. The only other writing on this knife is the Miguron emblem here on the pivot pin. I will take this apart and show you exact construction in here and everything. But for now, let's just say it's got ball bearings and a front flipper, and the action's pretty good. So if you like using a front flipper that way, it works. Some people are going to be able to do the reach over thing. I'm not that good at the reach over thing. I just don't have that skill set to do it that well. There you go. I just did it once, but I have to compromise my grip to do that. At least the jimping goes nice and round over that edge, so that's easier to do. Lockup solid. There's no blade play side to side, up and down. Lockup is nice and early. Actually, not early. It's actually right where I like it to be on a brand new knife. There's not a big cutaway here, or nothing of a cutaway here to get at that lock bar release. We do have a little bit of a chamfer here on the steel liner on this side, and of course a chamfer on the lock bar arm with some jimping on it. Now, you can get in there to disengage that. It's just takes a little bit to reach in there. When I first got the knife and wasn't used to it, I often found my thumb just sort of sliding over, and then I had to concentrate and focus on it to release that lock. Now, it's just second nature now that I'm used to the knife. That's one thing I wish they would change. It's not really a con. It's sort of a thing. Just I wish they would have made this handle come down just a little bit here, so you can get at that liner lock arm to, disengage the lock. Moving on to the rest of the handle, we've got G10 over highly skeletonized liners. Now, the liners are somewhat thick. I wish they would have made them just a little bit thinner, and that's because the balance point is right there. Now, I'd like the balance point to be here. Not big difference, but if they could have taken a little bit more weight off those liners, the balance point could be exactly where I like. But it's very common for knives to have their balance point right about where it is. I just prefer it to be a little closer to the pivot pin. The G10 slab's not flat, it's slightly rounded, so it's thickest right down the midsection. And we've got a nice chamfer over here, just slightly rounded edges everywhere else. Slight curvature to the handle. It's fairly comfortable in hand. There's no hot spots. It's just a decent handle. We've got T8 screws holding it together, and they're nice flat T8 screws. I really like these, good quality screws. We've got a lanyard hole here. A 550 paracord can fit through there. I do wish they would have chamfered those edges. Again, that's a really minor thing. G10's got glass fibers in it, and so glass fibers can be sharp, and without the chamfer on there, you can start to get your paracord to fray a little bit over time. I don't use lanyards anyway, so for me, it's not a big deal at all. Nicely rounded back here, for a reverse grip. It's very comfortable on the hand back here, so that's good. Even a pull kind of grip is not bad. Pocket clip, it's right side only. Again, we've got T8 screws. We've got a nice milled pocket clip. It's not just a stamped clip that they folded over, so that's really nice. And I didn't double check. I've got to go get a magnet. I think this is probably just steel. I don't think it's titanium. Miguron's website doesn't say it's titanium, so I'm assuming it's just steel. We've got, of course, like I said, the emblem over here and a T8 screw on that one. And that pretty much covers, the outside of the knife. That's how it's made. It cuts quite well, and it slices quite well. By cutting, I mean, let's imagine I'm cutting through this. Cutting is just, pushing through it. And when I say slicing, it means doing that kind of action to, pull something through it. Of course, I'm not going to cut through a sharpening stone. And piercing, we all know what piercing is, right? This knife is not a good knife for piercing, primarily because there's no guard here. It does get a little wider here, but you've got no protection. If you're, plunging this into something and you've got something solid and it stops, your hand might go over that edge. And then you've got some nice slices on your fingers. So if you're looking for a knife that you're going to be using to pierce into things, this knife is probably not that. But for cutting and slicing, it did a pretty good job. They did a good job of sharpening this, at least for getting the good sharpness they did. But the sharpening angle, we're going to find out, this side was sharpened fairly well. This side was sharpened just terribly, and we're going to go over all those specs in just a little while. But first, we're going to do a teardown. The first thing you notice is all the skeletonizing. Very nicely done. I like that. Funny thing is, we've got a D-shaped pin back here, which is kind of cool. These screws here got that little D-shaped end to keep them from spinning freely. But this pin, it just spins. Well, we've got the same kind of solution that we've seen a number of other companies do. We've got a pivot pin head. The G10 here's got a ledge on it, and the pin has got a cutout section right there that keeps it from spinning freely. So once it's in place, there it is like that, and it doesn't turn. We've got ceramic ball bearings right here in phosphor bronze cages. The screws here, these are good quality screws. They're not cheapo screws. And of course, there's a pivot collar. I reassembled it with some good oil. The oil I still haven't done my review of. Gunny Glide, that stuff is just stunning. Got much freer action now. It just flies out with authority, much better than it did when it was dry, like when I got it out of the box. By the way, I didn't mention explicitly the detent on this. Detent's pretty good. It's a little soft. I can hold onto the handle and make the blade come out if I give it a good wrist whack. Of course, not in this tiny space above the table. So the detent needs to be made a little bit stronger. And I didn't mention the blade alignment. It's pretty good. It's not exactly down the middle, but it's pretty good. How much does this thing weigh? It weighs 121 grams. That's 4.27 ounces. Not bad for what you get. The sharpness from the factory got a score of 90 best. That's very good. The cutting edge length, 92.4 millimeters, 3.64 inches. Blade length, tip to the closest spot on the handle is a bit more, 95.3 millimeters, 3.75 inches. How thick is this blade? 3.65 millimeters, that's 0.1435, so well over 1/8 of an inch. That's nice. How thick, or what's the depth of the blade? It's actually biggest right about where my fingers are now, not back here at the heel, right at the beginning of that swedge going up there. 24.5 millimeters, 0.965 of an inch. How thick is it behind the grind? Well, it's right at that limit that I have for myself. I wouldn't want it any thicker. It's 0.5 millimeter, which is 19.5 thousandths of an inch. In imperial measurements, my limit is 20 thou. This is just a tiny bit under. In metric, it's 0.5 millimeter. I don't like it to be thicker behind that edge than that. The grind angles, I already mentioned that a little bit. This side's got an average of 19.3 degrees along the length of the blade. This side's got an average of 32.6 degrees. If the blade's straight up and down like this, one side's pretty good, the other side's, way wonked out here like this. It's ridiculous. This side starts at the heel at 20.8 degrees. In the middle, it's 16.7 degrees. At the tip, it's 20.3 degrees. That's over 4 degrees change along the length. But it gets worse, much worse. This side starts at 29.8 degrees, and it consistently gets worse, ends at 35.5 degrees here. 5.7 degrees of change along the length of this thing. It was terribly sharpened. Unfortunately, that is so common these days. It frustrates me to no end how badly knives are sharpened. And not just these low budget knives. I've had knives in the $100 range that have the same kind of issues. Generally not as bad as this. With 14C28N like this, I'd probably sharpen this to 18 degrees per side for most purposes, for most uses. On to the handle. The handle length, 117.5 millimeters, 4.63 inches. The grip area, it's right around 11 centimeters or 4 1/3 inches. Lots of grip. This is a big handle. The thickness of the handle, right along the thickest part, 14.9 millimeters. That's 0.586 of an inch. Yeah, so it's a little bit thick. The handle depth, it's widest right up here at the beginning of your grip by your index finger. 24.5 millimeters, 1 inch, right there. And when the knife is closed, the widest point is not up here like you might think. It's actually pretty close to the middle of the knife, 27.5 millimeters, 1.08 inches. And the total length of this knife from tip to end, 213 millimeters, 8.39 inches. So that's the specs. I've covered everything else. Let me go over my summary of this thing. I'm happy with it, for the most part. Sharpening, that's something I can fix at home. Hopefully you can fix that at home too. Thankfully, it's not too terribly thick behind the grind. Good blade, good pivot. I can make that detent a bit stronger too at home. I did a whole video series, 3 videos on how to fix detent issues. So if you've got detent issues on your liner lock or frame lock knife, watch that series. It can probably help you out. Things like alignment are good. I like that there's T8 screws. I like that the pivot pin does not spin freely. And even the pocket clip's got T8. Oh, I didn't demonstrate the pocket clip, did I? I got to do that now. Sometimes I forget things and I do them later, but here we go. So it climbs over that edge just fine. It's a little bit tight. Look at that. I can't get it all the way to the back. So while the pocket clip looks good and it holds on nicely, thick pants, and this isn't even terribly thick, are not going to like this very much at all. There's just not a lot of room, back in that section right there. If you've got, linen shorts or something. So the pocket clip, it doesn't get a fail. It doesn't get a pass either. It's sort of in that in-between land of, looking great. But performance-wise, it's not as good as it should be. Maybe they just milled the hole where this thing sits in a little too deep. I'm going to try to put something in there to make it stand off just at the tiniest bit, like 0.5 millimeter or something. And hopefully that can make it better while still having enough threads to hold on tight. We'll see what I can accomplish in that regard. The rest of the pros, it's a heavy-duty knife, good action, strongly built, you know, big stop pin and stuff. Nice sharpness choil here. I really like that. I told you why. I like that there's minimal badging. That's kind of good. Now, things that are just okay. They're sort of neutral. They're not pros, they're not cons. Access to this lock release, it could be better, but it's not terrible. I'd like the lanyard hole to be chamfered a little bit. That's not that big a deal. The balance point, yeah, it's not great, but it's far from bad. And I'd like there to be more jimping up here. Now, the cons, the biggest con on this knife is the pocket clip. I wish it was right and left, and I wish I could get it fully deep. You know, a deep carry pocket clip might be even better, but this pocket clip itself could have been made better simply by not sinking it in that deeply into the handle there. Another option that you can do to fix that, if you can't get this to go deeper, is take the pocket clip off, take it all the way apart, and maybe sand the G10 down a little bit. You know, the G10 that's just right behind here. You know, there's enough room over here. Like in this area, there's enough room. But you could just sand away some of the G10 here so that you can get it fully deep. So there's a couple ways to make this pocket clip better, although you shouldn't have to. That's the point I'm trying to make. Overall, it's pretty good. I'm happy. Thanks to my supporters. You guys are awesome. If you'd like to support the channel, go to patreon.com/CCE or click that join button that's right below the video. And thank you for liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. And remember, friends, cut towards your chum, not your thumb.